6 minutes after 10, I am beaming from ear to ear because I am joined for the next hour by a national treasure, an incredible tactician, and someone who has advanced the game of football in South Africa in ways that very few have managed to achieve. The coach, manager of Banyana Banyana, Desiree Ellis. Thank you so much for joining us for this middle hour on the Eusebius Mkhwanazi show.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to the listeners.
Well, I was a bit worried because I was so excited, and then I realized you're a Man United fan. So I think this is where the interview ends, basically.
I don't think you should be worried about that. We all support whoever we feel we want to support. So I hold no grudges.
Wow, what was it like watching Man United Liverpool?
It was amazing. I actually won a competition.
Really?
It was a text SMS competition. I was watching TV, and I was like really bored. And then there was a question about Vinnie Jones, Roy Keane, and Dennis Wise.
Yeah.
Something to do with yellow cards or red cards or whatever. And I sent in the text, and I was at work, and I got this phone call to say that I'm going into the main draw. And I asked what the main draw was. It was a trip to watch any Man United game. And I'm just standing there dumbstruck, and then I'm looking around because we have open offers, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, did anybody hear that? And then 10 minutes later I get a call and they say they made a mistake. I actually won the main prize. And I'm standing there and I put the phone down and I put my hands up and I start screaming. Everybody comes running, what's wrong? And I said I won this competition, and I called my brother and I said, don't say anything to anyone yet because, they're going to call me on the show, and then I'm going to it's going to be live. They're going to call me. I'm going to go on the show, and then everybody will see, because I still thought it was a joke. And the next minute I get a call from my mother. So my brother called my mother.
Wow.
And then I took him with me to Old Trafford, and
that's so cool.
It was just so amazing.
Oh, well, and Liverpool lost, but we won't talk about that. No, I just your love for the game is so palpable in all the interviews you give and in some of your post-match press conferences. And I'm just curious, how that love for the game first started and when you fell in love with football and how.
I think I was about 6 years old. I went to a school, Dryden Street Primary in Salt River in Cape Town, and they had a section where they had the boys section and they had the girls section, and then they had in those days, the sub A and sub Bs, they had that. And I used to regularly jump over the fence and play with the boys, and used to be in serious trouble because you were not allowed in the boys' playground. But I also played netball for the school. So I got out of detention by going to play netball after school. And when there was no netball after school, I would rush down. We lived by my grandmother in Salt River because both my parents worked at the time. And we used to stay there after school. And the boys would be waiting outside, playing in the street.
Yeah.
And because in those days the granny was very strict, you couldn't just go out and play. Most of my cousins were boys. So we didn't only play football, we played other games as well, cricket, you name it. And we used to end up challenging different streets, but not in my wildest imagination back then could I think of all of this.
Absolutely. Wow. How did did you become the coach of your street team as well?
No. We moved. My grandmother passed on, and we all moved away we then grew much older and moved away. And I never really, sometimes if I go visit my brother who lives in Woodstock, I would drive there and there's not a child playing in the street. And it's such a shame, because we used to play often, and when the people used to come from work, because you had to pass that road to go to the station, we used to be very annoyed because it would stop our game, you know. And then after that, you would be called in to come and have a bath and, eat and get into bed. So the kids out there don't play in the street anymore. That's such a shame, because I think if you speak to any girl child out there who played back in the day when I played, even now, they grew up playing with boys.
Absolutely. And did you then, did the playing come before the watching, or did you also begin to watch more professional matches as you grew older?
Look, I always loved playing, but I also loved watching football. I would sometimes go with my uncle and have my little bag with me just in case they were short or something.
Oh yeah, with boots.
With boots, yeah.
So you would carry your boots around.
I would go and watch games, and then one or twice they were short and I would play, and they wouldn't know that I was a girl. They would only tell them after.
Oh wow!
That was a girl that
and
you
you
played.
probably schooled all of them.
And that was a girl that you played against. But I just love the game. My late father was very supportive. He was my biggest critic, but also my biggest supporter. I remember making the provincial team in Cape Town, and was still at school, and whole afternoon I was checking my bag if I got all my stuff. And that evening when we left, as we were halfway to the venue, I scratched in my bag and my boots were not in there. And I said to him, I think I forgot my boots at home. And he said, if you don't play tonight, it's your own fault. And lo and behold, I played and I scored a hat-trick. So he was my biggest supporter. When the club that I was at, Athlone Celtic, when they folded, or were about to fold, my late father and mother took over the club, and all my sisters were forced to play.
Wow, it's so amazing how parents and young kids who are growing up in the game form a bond over the game. I remember I used to play also quite seriously until about under 17, but I remember at the age of like 8, I had a deal with my father. He was like, if you score a goal, you get rewarded, but every time you hit the ball over the bar, then the reward gets diminished. And I just remember that like ringing in my head at the age of 8, like never hit the ball over the bar.
Well, I was never rewarded. My father used to be very critical though. I think that made me out to become the player and the person I am. I knew deep down he was excited and happy, but he was always critical. He always pushed me to do better, pushed me on. He would tell you, hey, she was good today, but then he would tell me it wasn't good enough. I needed to do this better and I needed to do that better. And I think that made me to be a better player and become a better person.
And do you have similar relationships with any of the people around you who play football, and how does it play out in your family? For example, like I just have a ritual with my mom now. We always watch the Liverpool match, and in fact also commented a lot on the World Cup when Banyana was involved. But it becomes this like ritual where we come together, and we share and we WhatsApp and, goal, penalty. Do you feel that in your family as well?
Well, I currently live in Johannesburg now, and the rest of the family is in Cape Town. But my sister's a Liverpool supporter, and the rest of the family is all Man U.
Shout out to your sister.
And the rest of the family is all Man U. So we would sometimes come together, or sometimes my brother would just text, did I watch that? Did I see that? Or my nephew would. But other than that, we would sometimes watch it together, especially over weekends, if it's a really, really big game. Other than that, then I have my niece's little boy who's a huge Chelsea fan. And then we would, just text each other. But most times when I was in Cape Town, we sometimes watch the big games together.
I want to come on to your playing career because, from those street matches, you grew into a phenomenal player and eventually, even became a player for your country. When did you first realize that you weren't just good, you were really good?
I don't like to speak about myself like that, really. I just love the game, People ask, where do I get the passion for the game? I think it's just a passion for things that you do. I think if you don't do it as the best that you can, then you shouldn't be doing it. Because you shouldn't do anything in half measures. You should just give it your all in whatever project you're busy with. And if you cannot give your all, then you shouldn't be part of the project. And I used to love training. I remember the many coaches that I had along the way. We used to stay after training and do free kicks and do penalties and do shooting, etc. And the day that I didn't, that I looked for an excuse not to do it, I knew it was time to stop playing. But I used to love training. Didn't matter whether it was raining or whether it was windy, and it can be rainy and windy in Cape Town. And it didn't really matter. And I just loved the game. And I wasn't fortunate to play at school though. But I used to regularly once a year play with the teachers against the boys, and that's where I was first scouted for a girls team.
Wow.
I didn't know back then that there was girls playing football. So when people tell me they don't know of girls, then I can sympathize with that, And joined my first club called Athlone Celtic, and I remember going to the meeting, and standing out there, very flat-chested, because I was 15 and very short hair. And as they walked past, they kept asking, "Who's that boy? Who's that boy?" And then I left, and they came back. And my first game that I played, I was a substitute. I came on at halftime, and I scored the winner. And my dad was there, and he made so much noise that they asked him to come back and support them.
This is the critical dad who is shouting on the sidelines.
This is the critical dad, yes. So that's where it started, really, playing football. And for me, just playing with the boys in the street, I think that was the ultimate for me. I couldn't wait to get from school and play with the boys.
And you're one of those rare people who's not only played for your country but also coached your country. What was the Banyana career like? What was it like, becoming part of a national team?
Well, we got a call, and I remember I was working in a meat market in the storeroom, and I got a call to come and try it for the national team.
Wow.
And in those days, we traveled in a minibus, and I got there. I remember Terry Payne being the first coach.
Oh, okay.
And I made the squad as a vice captain. The first captain, Anthea, was also from Cape Town. I made the squad as a vice captain and scored a hat-trick on debut with 3 other players. I remember Kabuzita was the other.
Hat-trick on debut, that's one way to announce yourself.
We won 14-0 against Swaziland.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and we were sitting at supper, so everybody's got their own clothes on. And this lady walks in and she says, where's Banyana? Where's the South African national team back in the day? And Kabuzita, I remember telling her that, but this is the team. And she said, well, I don't know any of you. And as she walked out, Kabu said, you'll surely know us tomorrow. And we beat them 14-0. I scored a hat-trick, Kabu scored a hat-trick, and I remember co-midfielder Bertha King also scored a hat-trick, and we beat them 14-0. And that was the start. We didn't play international matches as often as they play now. And there was interprovincial tournaments every year where you regularly get selected or not. And along the way, I remember being dropped 4 times. When your name's not called out after the tournament, that means you didn't make the squad. And when the squad gets called, you get a call back. And I think that was the most amazing times for me. I'm still friends with most of the players I played back then, back in the day. And when we'll always get text messages and of support for each other, because some of them are also coaches. And I played in the national team until 2002, when we won our first trophy against Zimbabwe in the COSAFA Cup. That was my very last match for the national team. But along the way, when I first made the team, I lost my job, because when we drove back in the minibus, we got a puncture and I got back to work a day late, and I got fired.
Sure. That was, I suspect that was a very good day for South African football.
Well, I won't say I didn't care, but I was living my dream now, and I was out of work for 3 years. I think that was the toughest time for me as well, being out of work for 3 years, and having to sacrifice not having soccer boots because my parents couldn't afford it, and having taped up boots because I had nothing else. But that, I think, was the most amazing times for me.
Well, I can't wait to continue this fascinating conversation. We're in conversation with national treasure, coach of Banyana, Desiree Ellis. We'll be back with more stories of her love for the game, her footballing philosophy, and of course, those World Cup experiences after this break. And I'm in conversation with the coach of Banyana, Desiree Ellis. We're having such a great conversation. We've heard about how she developed her love for the game. Just before we left for the break, you were telling an amazing story about how even though you had risen to the heights of the national team, the resources were so low that you were still, driving back in a minibus, losing your job because you came back late from a tournament and, having to still keep taping up your boots and that kind of thing. And, looking at the heights that you've reached, it's easy to forget, particularly with the inequalities of resources in our sports, just what a battle you fought to not only uplift the Banyana brand and name in South African soccer, but just get to the level of success that you did.
Look, we all face challenges in our life, and it's how you recover from that. That wasn't the only moment as well. In 2010, I was an ambassador for the World Cup, and that was absolutely amazing in South Africa. And after the World Cup, obviously, I needed to decide what I was going to do. Do I go back into corporate because I worked for a photo agency, or do I just continue with what I'm doing? And I decided to continue with what I was doing. So I was a project coordinator for an organization called Stars in Their Eyes, who would use football as a tool to educate coaches and give them life skills in the community. So it was a project around the country, supported by the Dutch Football Association. And I then got an opportunity to go and do my UEFA B license. Unfortunately, I had to sacrifice that because at the time I didn't have a full-time job. I had 4 months left on my car. And if I had to go and do the UEFA B license, I might have lost my car. So I also had to visit a bank and make arrangements with regards to the bond because I didn't have a full-time job until I got back on my feet. So those challenges you face, but I think those challenges that you face is the norm for most people. But people think it cannot happen to people like us, who are in football. But it does happen. And I think that made me stronger. And sometimes the sacrifices that you make back then is part of the success later on in your life. And that's one of the sacrifices that I had to make. And the UEFA B license was fully paid for. But just not being able to get an income for 4 months would have meant that I would have been behind with my car. And those were the last 4 months that I needed to pay and would have lost that. So that's a sacrifice that I needed to make. Because as a coach, you've got to be mobile. You've got to be able to go places, and it wouldn't have been possible.
And it's really, distressing to think that on the one hand, you're competing and eventually you go on to become a coach that competes at a world-class level. That's hard enough. But to have to deal with, economic challenges and life challenges at the same time is nothing short of superhuman in many ways. There's been a big debate in our society as well because, it has emerged, how difficult it is for Banyana players who sometimes have to have separate jobs on the side. This question of just the inequality of pay and of resources. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I'm a technician. Unfortunately, my job is to coach.
Sure.
I leave all of that to the administrators, to the officials. But women's football in the country is not professional, and that is a shame. But we have a lot of players that are currently abroad, a few that were trying to qualify for the Champions League. And that will really help the national team. And it's anticipated that National League is going to start pretty soon. There's been fixtures out since for the weekend of the 24th. And that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to that. It's the 9 best teams around the country from each province, including Mamelodi Sundowns, Bloemfontein Celtic, and the University Club Champs, which are University of Johannesburg. That's the start of the National League, and that could be exciting times for our country.
And I guess the professionalization comes with a need for corporate sponsorship, a need for people who have money in South Africa to recognize the importance and the brilliance of Banyana and the women's game in this country and actually come to the party. Do you have any thoughts on how we mobilize those resources to make sure that the game is funded in a way that matches the tremendous effort that's being put in, both from management, from technical staff, from video analyzers and players?
Look, we've got a fantastic sponsor in Cecil, but they cannot do it alone. So we are always urging more corporates to come on board, to make to assist if that is possible, because it will only take the game to the next level. You look at the USA, for example, they have so many sponsors, but obviously their climate in their country is completely different to ours. And hopefully with all the successes of Banyana, we'll get more corporates to come on board and be part of it. But we've got to give credit to Cecil and the Football Federation for making opportunities for us to play some of the top teams in the world over the last 3 years.
Sure.
I think we've played the USA twice in 3 years. We've played the Netherlands 3 times. We've played Sweden, we've played France. So we've really played really top countries around the world. When I looked at the top three in the world, Netherlands, USA, and Sweden, we've played them. The only countries we didn't play, I think, in the last 16 was Italy and England. So we've played all those countries, and it shows that the federation is serious in assisting us.
And do you feel like making sure that those games could happen was a big reason why we were able to go to that next level, get to qualification, because we kind of were able to see what the best in the world looked like even beforehand?
I think that preparation was key, especially leading up to the qualification for the World Cup. I think the COSAFA Cup came at the right time as well, because it's a similar type of tournament. We played that in September, and in November we were playing qualifying matches at the AFCON. But I think the first game was the most important game for us, the Nigeria game. Any game in any tournament, or the first game in any tournament, is the most important. And then the draw came out, and that we played Nigeria, so it became even more important. And I think that was so key for us in winning that game and possibly getting the easier semi-final. That was a shock for us too. Ghana, being the host, got knocked out, and we had to play Mali. And we were not going to underestimate any team, So the preparation leading up to that was really important. We even had the opportunity to play Chile, who'd also qualified for the first time for the World Cup. But the half of CONMEBOL will play off against the half of Africa, the runner-up in the Olympic final qualifier. So it was good to play another country and play away from home. And that was really challenging because of the time difference.
Brilliant. Well, we're in conversation with coach of Banyana, Desiree Ellis, someone loved and revered across our nation. We're going to shoot to the headlines now, and we'll come back with our discussion. Want to hear about that feeling of qualification, get some of her views, her tactical views on the game, and continue with her story. Back after the headlines. 33 minutes after 10, I'm Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh in conversation with Desiree Ellis, who is the coach of Banyana, and a national treasure. And we are also going to be taking some of your calls. So if you'd like to dial in, ask some questions, the number is 011-883-0702. Send us a WhatsApp on 072-702-1702. The video of our conversation will also be available on my YouTube page, so make sure you check that out, or on SMWX. So I really wanted to ask you about the moment of qualification, Banyana's qualification for the World Cup. Just an incredible moment that united the nation at a time when I think we needed unity, but was also just a great sporting achievement. Take us behind the scenes of the moment of qualification and what it was like when you realized that you, as coach, had achieved something that had never been done before.
Look, a lot of planning goes in behind the scenes with the analysts, getting as much information about the opposition and making sure that the players know as much about it. And then the training sessions all geared up for that. And when Mali knocked out Ghana, we surely took notice of them. And they had a few key players that really could trouble us. So we planned around that. But we knew what we needed to do. And Timmy scored early. That settled the nerves a bit. And then we knew we needed that second goal. And then Lebogang Ramalepe normally comes up with these amazing goals from distance. And with about 80 minutes, she scored. And I had to stay calm because my smile inward was really broad. And I looked to the bench, and we were not going to concede 2 goals. We pride ourselves on being defensively really good, and for the last 5-10 minutes I said, let's manage the game, let's not do anything silly. And when the final whistle went, it was just amazing scenes. You run to players, some are busy praying, some are busy hugging each other. You get to Janine, she's lying flat on her back crying, and I think it was amazing scenes. Noko came to me and she put her arm around me and she said, Coach, we did it, Coach, we did it. And then some of the fans in the stadium, Cecil were there, Fran was there. We just looked at each other and we just screamed, and the celebrations went on and on. And I was eventually taken to the press post-match press conference, and I was just smiling, and Fran was just showing the thumbs up, because you realize of what's done, but you don't realize the magnitude of what it is, and by the time the press con was over, all the celebrations in the dressing room was over. So you don't really get to be part of that, but I can only imagine, it must have been really insane. So we get back to the hotel, and the hotel staff holding placards saying Bayana, Bayana, and we're just screaming and singing. And I don't think anyone slept that night. I didn't sleep. The adrenaline was still pumping. You switch on your phone, you see all these messages, and you want to answer them like individually and personally, but everything is just running through your mind, and you really, really can't sleep. I don't think I slept at all, because we had to travel the next day, to go to Accra to go play, prepare for the final against Nigeria. But we got a video call from the president of the country. He was in Argentina, and he video called us for a couple of minutes. I was part of a big WhatsApp group.
Indeed.
Until the video call was over. I think that was absolutely amazing.
That's really nice.
But when you get back to South Africa, you then realize the magnitude as you come out of our Tambo art, and you see all the people. You just get a lump in your throat to realize the magnitude of what you've done. I think it's many years of hard work in the making. Coaches that have come before, it's like you build a house. They put down the foundation, somebody else lays the brick, So coaches and players that come in, they lay the foundation. I mean, I had aspirations as a player to go and play at the World Cup. It didn't happen for me, but it happened for this generation of players. But the players were amazing. Throughout that campaign, they gave their all. We'd win the match, and it was very hard to contain yourself after winning the first match against Nigeria, and even more so after qualifying for the World Cup. But you still had a game to go, and the players were really focused, and they were absolutely amazing. People don't realize the work that goes on behind the scenes, the hard work that they put in, and together with the staff. I think I always say teamwork is dreamwork. We believe in teamwork. I think it's important because it's a team sport, and we all need each other. We all need that little bit from everywhere. The medical team making sure that we have players that are injury-free. The kit manager making sure that we always look beautiful, etc. The bus driver being on time. That is so key. The manager running around and really being busy, and the players at the end are the most important, because you have to make sure that they're fresh, you have to make sure that they understand and that they carry out the game plan, and they were absolutely magnificent in that. And the support of the Federation and Cecil on top of that, I think that was immense in that we qualified. It's just a pity we couldn't bring the trophy home, but we gave it our all in the final. And it's almost anticlimax where you qualify for the World Cup. But nonetheless, the players were still completely committed and completely focused in wanting to win the final. And unfortunately, we did not. But I don't think South Africa could have been more prouder of this group of players.
Absolutely.
Because they really went out there and really put their bodies on the line, really wanted to qualify more than anything, and to make more opportunities for players to come. Absolutely.
I see the lines are lighting up. A lot of people wanting to talk to you. So let me go to those lines now. Mushere?
Yes, Susan, Desiree. How are you this morning?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
All right. Susan, let me just congratulate Desiree and the girls for really flying the flag high. And also, it is humbling to hear Desiree also paying tribute to her predecessor. You can see how humble she is. Then that really, it warms one's heart to see the national team performing so well. My challenge to the sponsors and also to the powers that be is to pump money to this national team, because the money that the girls are in is too little. The work that you are doing really is making us, some of us as a country, to be proud to be South African, to celebrate, because for quite some long we've been seeing our national team not performing well. But the great work that you are doing, really one is humbled and one is really happy to see the great work that you are doing. Keep up the good work, and really it is warm heart. It is heartwarming to see the great work that you are doing, and also the respect that you're showing to your predecessor. That is fantastic. Keep up the good work, and the good Lord may bless you and the team, and also to the team really taking your instruction. Teamwork, of course. That's why I'm saying you're making some of us proud.
Thanks so much, Mashiri. I'm going to go to Klein Boy, who'd also like to give a call, and then I'll go back to Banyana coach Desiree Ellis. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Welcome. How are you, man?
Fine, thanks.
I'm good. I like to speak to the coach. My coach.
Hi, how are you, Klein Boy?
I'm good. I'm good. You know, you guys did us very proud. And I know it's difficult, especially for ladies, to be treated as equal as men. But you guys, you overcome the obstacles without any leak that you guys are playing, but you managed to do well at the African Cup. You managed to do well in every game that you played. So it's like you're having a professional soccer league already.
Thanks so much, Klein Boy.
Look, you cannot not acknowledge the work that has gone in by the previous coaches. Joseph Mkhwanazi was the first coach to qualify for a major competition, and that was the 2012 London Olympics. Vera Power qualified for Rio 2016, and our group qualified for the World Cup. And you cannot not acknowledge that, because that was the start of the process. And coaches that have come before, that they put in building blocks, not just them, but players as well, put in building blocks and made it better for the next generation to come. And hopefully this generation will make it better. Not forgetting our under-17s also qualified for the World Cup last year.
Without major sponsorship
without
as well.
a major sponsorship, and we're hoping the under-20s can follow suit, But you've got to acknowledge work that has been put in by people. You cannot take the credit for yourself, and I never take the credit, because we are a team. We have a fantastic technical group and support staff, and that is key as well. I think that's a lot, just as important as the players. Obviously, the players are a little bit more important, but I think that is the most important thing. And I think teamwork was key for us. Teamwork was key in the essence that we always said, if the team does well, the individual will stand out.
I want to talk a little bit about the experience at the World Cup as well. What a moment to lead a team into its first World Cup. What was it like to arrive? What was it like to play in some of the games? That moment when we went 1-up against Spain. Just take us through, what it was like to be the first coach to actually lead South Africa to a World Cup, and some of the things you learned through that process.
Look, when we walked out for the game against Spain, that's when you really realize how big that moment is. The national anthem is played, and I'll use proper Cape Town language. My sister said, "You're going to chunk when they play the anthem." I tried to contain myself because I was very emotional. We were just hoping that the occasion don't overwhelm the players, which it did not. I felt that first 30 minutes, first 45 minutes, we were absolutely magnificent.
Yeah.
The girl from Tembi, she comes up with these amazing goals once in a while. She scored a similar one against Nigeria. And we could have gone 2-0 up, I think just after halftime, 10 or 15 minutes after halftime, we could have gone 2-0 up, and we did not. And we always knew that Spain would have a lot of the possession. And we never really look at playing defensive. Sometimes when you're under pressure, you become almost defensive, and we try to urge them to push on, And I thought the 2 penalties, we were unfortunate. The one took a deflection and went on to Janine's hand, and I thought they would send that to VAR, and they did not. And the second one, it's a lot of debate around that, but I felt she'd kicked the ball and obviously followed through, but the player ran into her, and going down to 10 players and then conceding as well was always going to be difficult. And we tried to push on and got the third one against us, but that was a game to win, which we did not. And we felt if we won that game, maybe get a point against China, and then we threw. And then the game against China became a must-win. And we didn't create as many in that game. But we had a couple of chances, and we didn't get the result we wanted. And then the Germany game was going to always be our toughest game. We didn't start well, conceded poorly, but I thought in the second half we had a couple opportunities where we could have got back into the game, and we did not. But I felt we gave it our all at the World Cup. You know, when you get an email from Jill Ellis before the World Cup and says, go out there, we know you know you got this, and you know, and then sending an email afterwards and saying, take some time out, just realize how well this group has done.
Absolutely.
You know, we might not have gotten the results we wanted, but I feel we're on the right track. You know, and then now getting the opportunity to go to the COSAFA, being without your overseas-based players. And strangely enough, the final against Zambia, we only had 2 players on the pitch that started the final last year against Cameroon. It was Rafil Bejani and Lebogang Ramalepe, and we've always used the COSAFA Cup to give players an opportunity. There were so many first, breaking the Banyana record, of which I was part of.
Yeah.
That was a challenge because we were leading 6-0 at halftime, and I said to them, why not go for the record? You know, that's one of the lessons learned from the World Cup. The USA played Thailand, and they put a marker down by beating them 13-0. And we didn't know what to expect from Comores, and we were 6-0 up at halftime, and I said, let's keep up the intensity, you know, but let's try and break the record. And in that, we broke the COSAFA record as well. Tisetso scored the first goal of COSAFA and the last goal of COSAFA, and those are our first 2 goals for Banyana.
Wow.
You know, Bambanani had scored 3 goals in the tournament. That was her first goals for Banyana. You had Ngokolo coming on as a substitute from the under-20s, and she scored her first goal. Refilwe scored 4. You know, so there were a lot of firsts. Amanda Mtandi got a first hat-trick for Banyana.
You became someone who had both won it as a player and a coach.
Yeah,
which you conveniently leaving out.
You know, so there were a lot of firsts, but it's never about me. It's always about the collective. Because the minute it becomes about one individual, you know, then we're there for the wrong reasons. You know, it's always about the collective, and by giving players an opportunity, we always also make the pool bigger, and it was good preparation for our Olympic qualifier coming up later this month.
I want to ask a little bit about your philosophy on the game. You know, to learn at the feet of someone whose tactical understanding is so deep. You know, I heard you talking about always trying to stay on top of the latest trends in football. What is your philosophy of play? What principles do you like to instill in your teams, and how has that evolved over time?
Look, we're not a tall nation, you know, and our strength is obviously to put the ball on the ground and play. And it's still a process. Where we want to move the ball around quickly, and we want to move off the ball. We want to move the ball around, obviously with a view to moving the opponent around. Because sometimes when we play teams, they sort of just don't want to come forward, and we have to then break them down. So we want to work on combination plays in certain areas. We want to play rondos around the field where we can to, you know, create opportunities. And I think that's important for us. We're never going to be a team that's going to play a ball in the air for the, you know, someone to head it on, etc. Because we are short nation, or actually women's football. You know, when we're standing out there and we're busy singing the anthems, you look at the opponents and you look and you see how tall they are. Even their goalkeepers are taller than our goalkeepers. But we want to put the ball on the ground because that's how comfortable we are. And we try to stay true to that. We try to stay true to that because that is who we are. Sometimes it becomes a battle, then we have to battle. But we try not to steer too far away from that.
It seems like a lot of the game has moved towards a pressing style, a style of defense where a lot of energy is needed to go up and fluster the opponents. What do you make of that development of like this new trend of pressing and high energy football?
Well, you know, it's got a lot to do with conditioning as well. Because if you're not in a good physical shape, you cannot do that for the duration of the game. But we always try to win the ball back as soon as we lose it. And if it's higher up the field, even more so, because it gives you an opportunity to create a goal-scoring opportunity. If we're not fortunate to win the ball, you know, we would then wait for the opponent and then collectively try and win it back. But we have a very good fitness coach. When you looked at the World Cup, our conditioning was not very far off from the other countries. You know, and that helped a lot because we needed to be really fit to be able to compete And I think if you play this pressing game, you really, really have to be in top shape. And it has to be done collectively, because if one person is late, then, you know, they just play around you and get out so easily. And that's a process. And sometimes you don't have enough time to work on it, because you get the team for a week. You have to prepare your attack and defense in that week. Work on goal scoring, etc. In that week, work on set pieces in that week, and make sure that by game day that the players are in a good shape still, that they are still fresh, that you haven't overworked them. So you have to look at all of that aspects within a week.
And what about formations? How have your views on formations and the tactical setup changed over time?
Look, I think a formation is just a structure. You also got to have the players to play, because some people will say, I play 4-5-1, but then they've got a little tiny striker, or they don't have the players in that formation. And the beauty of this team is that we can change formations within the game, which we've done on a regular basis.
I was going to say, because it's hard to know exactly which formation Banyana plays.
Which we can do, and the players are so comfortable in that. And we look for multifunctional players as well that are really comfortable. Look at someone like Rafil Wejani, who can play on the wing, who can play up front in a 3, who can play as a sitter, you know, who can play as a wing back. And we look at some of those players, and sometimes we'll play a player out of position, but just to see what the player has to offer. And at tournaments like the COSAFA Cup, that's where you can actually, you know, utilize all of that. But I think we also look at the opponent, obviously, before we make a decision on how we're going to play, and how we're going to, look at their weaknesses and try and, negate their weakness and stop them from using their strengths. So the formation is, but we try to stay true to who we are. If you concentrate too much on the opponent, then you forget about concentrating on your team.
How do you try and get better? And how did you do it as a player? You know, for some of the players listening and some of the people who might wish to go into management, what are the kinds of things you do to try and improve, to try and stay on top of your game?
Look, you always have to keep on educating yourself. You have to always keep on making sure that you on top of your game. As a player, you go out and you put that extra work in when no one is watching. And that thing transcends onto the pitch. You work on, people think you just get onto the pitch and you put the ball down and you put the ball in the top corner and free kick. It's hours and hours of work. So you'd be sitting on your laptop, going through things, looking at other games, looking at other teams, and looking at how you can become better. I often go to games, because when you go to a game, you learn so much. You learn so much all the time. A coach would play a 4-4-2 differently to what you would play a 4-4-2, for example, and you go and you say, oh, that's quite interesting. Maybe I can look into that, you know. But we also have a technical group at SAFA where you interact with the other coaches. I think that's so key, that you interact with the other coaches. We've had a workshop with Coach Stewart before about formations as well, and I thought that was really interesting for me. I learned so much in that one. Or you just sit down with Coach Molefe or Coach Thabo and you just talk about things. And they've been advisors to Banyana as well, or you go into the coaching education department and you sit with Coach Frans and you talk about the game. And the next minute, you're on a flip chart. You're busy, both of you are on a flip chart and you're busy chatting. So I've been fortunate that I had that support and that I could fall back on that. And sometimes coaches feel that they don't need to fall back on that. But I think, it's better for me as a coach to be able to fall back on that, because you learn all the time. You never know too much. And in that way, the team grows as well. Players will come and say, can we try this free kick? Can we try that free kick? Because, it's important. Like I say, it's a team effort and it's a collective effort. And I think everybody plays its part in that.
And you were actually talking in some of the interviews that you've been giving just about how developed that system of preparation actually is, and how many different people come together to prepare a match, from video analysis to fitness coaches to you at the top of that. Take us through your preparation process and what it's like to prepare for an important game or any game.
Look, we come in and we'll sit as a technical group and work out the training for the week. Because it's important that we do that. But we also have a captain and 2 vice captains, and we'll sit. We try to get feedback from them as well, how the players are feeling, and sometimes we would lessen the load. Otherwise you just carry on and think everything is okay. So it's important for that as well, to get that feedback. So you work on your defensive side, you work on your attacking side, and in the meanwhile there's individual analysis where you look at the training and players fetch the training or players fetch the game of the opponent and have a look at the game, and you break down the game as well. That is where the performance analyst comes in. Break down the game. In defense, how do they defend? In their build-up, how do they build up? How do they transition to defend and defense and attack? How do they do their set pieces? Is there a trend? Do they do a certain set piece the same way all the time? And how do they defend set pieces? Who their headers are? So it's very meticulous. And when we set that up, we then have to look at all of that and how we can counter that. Then you have your match day -1 where you have your so-called starting lineup against the rest, and sometimes someone in the other side stands up and you give that person an opportunity, and it's up to them then to grab that opportunity. You have your video analysis closer to the game. You have your opposition analysis where you give as much information, and sometimes we ask the players to break it down, so it's important that we don't just feed them, but we ask the players to break it down. In other words, maybe they understand and they would break it down, and they would come up and break it down and explain things. And then in the pre-match meeting, we go into a little bit more detail, not too much, of what we should be doing on the pitch, and what we should be stopping, etc.
Well, it's been such a great conversation. Still so many questions that I want to ask you, but we have run out of time. I guess we'll have to watch and see what is in store. But it's been really great to host coach of Banyana, Desiree Ellis, someone who has enlivened our lives as South Africans, revivified our energy for football in many ways, and brought a smile to the face of so many South Africans. It's been so great hosting you and having you. Thank you so much for joining us on 702.
Thanks.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And in today's episode, I'm extremely excited to be in conversation with Andrew Harding, who's BBC Africa correspondent. He's the author of The Mayor of Mogadishu and this very exciting, interesting, and incisive book called These Are Not Gentle People, which was published in 2020. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you for having me, Sizwe. It's a great honor.
So this is a really interesting work in the sheer range of themes on which it touches. But before we dive into some of those themes, I wondered if you could just summarize for our audience the events in 2016 which led you to write this book and around which this work revolves.
So in January the 6th, 2016, a group of white farmers responded to one of those alarm messages, a WhatsApp group message, that there'd been a farm attack on an elderly white farmer not far from Paris in the Free State. And they responded, they came rushing, about 40 or 50 people, fathers and sons, and they cornered 2 black men at the edge of a field just before sunset, pretty quickly. And some of those men then proceeded to beat the 2 arrested men. They'd essentially detained the 2 men without a fight, but they then proceeded to beat them in turn over a period of some hours. The police finally arrived, and the 2 men were taken away in the back of a police truck to Paris Hospital. One of them was considered so badly injured that he was taken a little later to Bloemfontein, to a hospital there. The other was actually misdiagnosed appallingly. and both men were pronounced dead the following morning. It was about 2 or 3 weeks later that I started following the case more closely, and I went down to the magistrates' court in Paris. I think it was February or March, and I was looking for a project, if you like, a book. I just finished writing the first book you mentioned, The Mayor of Mogadishu, a story about a man in Somalia, Britain, Somalia. But I had a bit of time free before I had to resume my BBC duties, and I was looking for something. I was looking for a crime story that could perhaps delve into some truths about South Africa, and I wanted to write it as a novel. I knew that very much from the start, that I wanted to write something in the, I was aspiring towards something like Truman Capote and In Cold Blood, one of those true stories, but that you're not really sure when you're reading it, whether it's a novel or the truth or somewhere in between. And I sat in the back of this magistrate's court, and I was immediately drawn into the drama of a group of whites who'd been arrested very quickly and charged with murder very quickly by the Hawks who'd arrived in town. There's a lot of political pressure on the Hawks, it seemed, to find the culprits in the case. And there were very quickly the usual demonstrations that we've seen in other cases of this kind outside, white farmers, mostly from out of town, people with a more of a political axe to grind, talking about white genocide. And against them, across the barbed wire that the police had set up, you had both the ANC and the EFF with their supporters also pressing for justice in the case. And the magistrate in the court, a very outspoken Indian woman called Leshni Pillay, very quickly gave the impression to me that she was under huge political pressure from the ANC and was very angry about that. She felt the case was being rushed. She felt that she was being pressured. And I got the sense of this potentially fascinating story. And so I decided to kind of attach myself to it and not to write anything for the BBC or for newspapers or anything, but to promise everybody that I encountered that I was there for the long game, that I wanted to earn their trust and to try and tell this story that I knew was complicated, but I had no idea quite how complicated and quite how many twists and turns there would be, that I wanted to tell it from all perspectives. And that's what I did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite, I don't know if it's surprising or not surprising anymore that the deaths of Samuel Chika and Simon Jubeda barely featured really in the mainstream political discourse, despite what seemed to be a torturous, potentially racially, well, certainly some of it racially motivated attack. And what struck me about the story as a whole is that it encompassed so much of the old, but also reflected a lot of the new. And I wondered, from your perspective, because I've heard in previous interviews you suggesting that you thought this was an interesting microcosm for South African society as a whole. What do you think this story is a microcosm of in its different features and facets?
When I was beginning to get interested in the story and considering it as a possible subject for a book, I was quite wary because I know these farm stories and I know how they tend to drag people to the extremes, to the fringes of politics here and of reality here in some ways. And I didn't want to get dragged to that kind of shouting match style of story. I wanted something that felt more real, more honest. But the truth is that, this is a case through which there is a very thick line of modern day racism. And you mentioned there, Chika and Jubeba, these two men whose identities right from the start and the whole way through the judicial process. Their identities were ignored, they were erased, they were confused. And that very quickly got me quite shocked and then increasingly angered. And that was one of, I think, the motivations for me to stick with it. And, you know, as much as living in Rosebank and, you know, taking my share of this, you know, of what's going right here in South Africa, over this past decade that I've lived here or more, it's very clear to me as well that a lot isn't going right, and that increasingly younger South Africans are looking to reevaluate, as they have every right to do, you know, the realities of the past 3 decades. And I felt that this story allowed me to look, not in a political way so much, but very much in a human community way, and the individual stories of these people and how out on the farms the races live apart and they struggle to engage. And when they do engage, there is so much mistrust. And the institutions that should be helping to bridge these gaps, in a case like this, I mean, obviously a murder case is an extreme event, but it's a revealing event in that, because of that. And every single institution enabled Simon and Samuel's identities to be forgotten or ignored or deliberately confused. And every single institution that should have somehow stood up for their dignity, the dignity of their families, betrayed them. And I wanted to tell that story, but I also wanted to make it clear what it looked like for those white farmers who were also in their bubble. And although some of them, in my view, are clearly, you know, people who've behaved with appalling violence and who are clearly show racism, there are also people in that community who I think are desperately lost and reaching out and trying to find a way to make things work in a community where it's so difficult to reach across those boundaries.
I think one thing that comes through is a broader frustration that I certainly feel, which is, on the one hand, the story shows the monstrous racial inequities that still persist and the racial violence that still persists. But on the other hand, it also shows the state's incapacity to grapple with these inequities, which seems to be such a frustrating feature of where it feels like South Africa is now. It feels as though in 1994, what we won was the ability for the state to bungle a case. And it's that frustration that I think the work captures so uniquely, is the historical violence, but the present incapacities and injustices which lie on top of those historical currents.
Because if you stand back from the story there in Paris, you could argue, well, the courts work. It took a long time, but they got a verdict. You may not agree with the verdict, but there were experts who turned up, highly competent in some cases, less so, I would argue, in others.
Right.
There was a medical system that looked after these men. An ambulance went out to greet them halfway. It wasn't perfect. There were some mixed diagnoses, but broadly speaking, you know, you can say the system works here, and it's true in so many ways in South Africa. This is a functioning country on so many levels. And yet, when you get a stress point and you dig a little deeper, and I suppose this is where the idea of a microcosm comes from. And a town like Paris is, to me, quite a sophisticated place. It's got its tourism, it's close to Joburg, it's got a complex and in many ways quite successful thing going. You know, it's a nice town in some ways. And yet you poke at these issues and these institutions, and they just seem to be skin deep, to be very fragile.
And in addition to there are many institutions at play here, both formal and informal. But one of the institutions is the criminal justice system, and what we get is an up close rendering of how that system works and doesn't work. What was it like being in that courtroom, and what insights did you gain on the broader criminal justice system by following this particular story so closely?
Well, I mean, the most obvious thing is the languid pace of it all. There is no sense of earnest focus on speed. And I appreciate that the justice system works in its own way, and it's okay for it to be slow to some extent. But for instance, this morning I was woken up by a text message and then a call from Ruth Kokota, who's the mother of Samuel Chicha, one of the dead men. I stay in touch with her, having got to know her quite well over these last 4 or 5 years. And she just heard that sentencing was supposed to take place today in Paris. I found out that it wasn't going to take place, that actually the prosecution has asked for another adjournment because they still, this is 2 years after the end of the trial, nearly 2 years after, a full year since the summary judgment by the judge, they still haven't been sentenced. The men involved, the accused, have not been sentenced. And so for all the people involved, for the guilty men, for their families, but above all for people like Ruth and the other relatives of the two dead men, they can't move on with their lives. And this is against the rules of the court process here. You're supposed to have a full judgment within 3 months. And yet the creaking pace makes you wonder, why is there no pressure? And I suppose part of that is that, and this is a problem globally, there aren't enough local journalists and enough good local media following cases like this, a case that very quickly slipped away from the headlines to be replaced by the next drama, the next sensation. There aren't enough journalists focusing on these cases to keep public attention on them and to keep pressure on the judiciary to do its job. And one thing I've been really struck by, just getting to know people in Tumahole, the township of Paris, is how little people know about what's going on in this case, and the absolute hunger for knowledge. When you go and you start talking to people, I remember just talking to some ambulance drivers outside the hospital a year or so back, and people were desperate to know what was happening. They hear rumors, but no one's got the time to keep focusing day in, month in, year in on this case, because it keeps getting delayed and it takes so long. But there's just this hunger to know what's gone wrong, what's happened. And yet, how can a community function when it doesn't know what's going on in a case as important to the community as this? And the Paris Gazette, the local paper, covered it, but it's not delivered in Tumahole. The local community radio station sort of covered it in Tumahole, but then it wasn't there for the verdicts. So I think enormous gaps in all those stepping stones that where information and power should be bringing a community together, and it's just not working.
Yeah, it somehow encapsulates a lot of the political moment. I remember, for example, in the 1990s, there were similar sensational stories or sensational events which did capture the imagination of the nation and were followed. And it's almost as though a sense of fatigue has developed around these sensational events. And we can't confront them anymore in the same way as we used to. Almost as if a kind of denialism, I don't know, either it's nihilism or denialism has set in.
Well, for instance, Sizwe, in the court itself, the fact that Simon and Samuel's identities were confused, you'd understand that the defense would want to do that. Why should they help the prosecution? The fact that it's very difficult to work out who hit who, which injury can be connected to which action, that's all very useful for the defense. So it's understandable when they don't make any attempt to really explain that. But the prosecution seemed, two black prosecutors, senior black prosecutors, seemed to kind of lean into that same mood, that sense of whatever it was. They never made a proper attempt either to explain who did what to whom. There was no proper timeline. There was no proper clarity. They relied, and I don't think it's necessarily the wrong move, although if you read the book and the podcast, you may come up with different conclusions. But they relied on common purpose. The idea, well, there was a group of men, they beat these two guys, the two guys died. Need we say more? So that was I suppose, a legitimate legal argument, and yet they should have done the hard work to prove who did exactly what. And I felt they failed there. And I never quite understood why they didn't do more.
So Andrew, on the channel we have various aspiring writers, and I think this is also work with artistic ambitions in addition to journalistic ones. And so I'd like to talk to you about style. In the postscript, you mention the approach you've taken, and you briefly alluded to it earlier. You've written what you've called a work of narrative nonfiction, so that it reads very similarly to a novel, but is also grounded in true events. Take us through the stylistic choice to do that. And then can you also go into some of the stylistic choices in your own writing? You write in very short sentences, quite vivid sentences. What lay behind the broader stylistic choice and some of your more detailed stylistic choices?
Well, the first thing is I wanted to write a thriller. I wanted to do justice to the drama in this story. And so I did not want to go off on long explanatory notes about the criminal justice system. I didn't want to kind of let down the urgency of the story. And also I wanted to interest the common reader. I didn't want this to be a book for people who are preoccupied with certain aspects of South African justice or criminality or farm murders or whatever. I wanted this to be a book that would appeal and sell, hopefully, to the general reader and to an international audience who might not have heard about South Africa and South Africa's current troubles, but who just wanted a damn good read and who liked non-fiction crime. So there was that. There was also, I think, from early on, a stylistic choice I took in the research, which was firstly to record everything, to conduct very, very long interviews, taped interviews overwhelmingly, in which I just tried to get people to explain what was going through their heads, and then to use all those different perspectives to recreate scenes as if I weren't there. So for instance, when Ruth Kokota, mother of Samuel, one of the dead men, learns that her son has been killed, it's a very tense and complicated moment. I spoke to her, I spoke to the two white farmers who were there and who told her. And I tried to recreate the scene, not as if I'm a journalist going, well, she told me this happened, then they told me this happened. But for me, and I wanted this from the start, to basically withdraw myself entirely from the process as a voice. I wanted also, and I explained this, as you say in the postscript, to play a little bit with how I use those interviews. So what I've done, and actually this was very much helped by my editor, Alison Lowry, we decided not to put most quotes in quotation marks. Instead, we wanted it to be obvious when you read it, you know when somebody's speaking, but there's a mixture of quotes that I heard in court, people saying. There are quotes that people said to me when they were recreating conversations they'd had with others. Then there are things that people just said to me, describing a situation and what they were thinking. And then when I was writing the book, if people said to me, well, this was what I was thinking, I wouldn't say that in the book. I would say, as she drove through this part of town, she was thinking this. Mm. My point being to try to, again, make the reader really feel that they're in the middle of this, that it's not a journalistic current events book, but it's a novel, but also in a way that when any of those people I interviewed would go back to the book, that they would say, well, this is true. This is what I was thinking. Andrew has been honest with the account I gave him. Of course, it may be utterly contradicted by other people, but my version is my version, and I think, hopefully, my hope is that I've captured what they were feeling and their point of view and their perspective. And because the crime itself at the heart of the book is so convoluted and so tense, and is the source of so much of the friction in the book, as this white farming community tears itself apart, trying to work out who should take responsibility for these two men's deaths. I went back to it again and again from all those different perspectives, and each time, and it's, I hope, a sort of cinematic thing, that each time you see the crime anew from somebody else's perspective.
It's interesting because you've mentioned now, but also in the book, that you get this feeling of moving between the real and the fantastical. The crime itself is so fantastical that you almost can't believe it's true and that something like this could have happened. And yet you know that it has been reported, it is in the world. So you kind of are aware you're reading nonfiction, but feel like, you know, there's an imaginative aspect to it as well, even though it's true. So you're definitely playing interestingly with the boundaries of truth and fiction.
What I've done as well, what I did as well, Sizwe, is to try not to be judgmental in it. So there is no, I mean, we're dealing with some very appallingly raw violence and the aftershocks of that violence, of suicide attempts, of marriages breaking down, and of this appalling gender-based violence that seems to infect almost every family, every portion of the community in there. I wanted to let those facts and those opinions speak for themselves. And that was partly because I thought it would make for a stronger book, but it was also, I think, something I've learned from my shorter TV and radio work, just as a consumer of news, that I find it much more powerful when there is restraint from a journalist, when people are allowed to speak for themselves, and when you underplay emotion and drama. And that's just a personal take. There are a lot of very good journalists who I think are far more emotive, who feel that, you know, you need to make the audience feel more angry. As a consumer, I just disagree with that. I prefer the restraint, sort of British irony, if you like, that sense of detachment. I find that much more moving. And that's another technique that I really tried to bring to bear in the book, even if I hope a reader at the end will not be mistaken about where I'm coming from in terms of, you know, what I think of how this played out. But I didn't want to overplay that.
That's interesting, because that was one thing that, well, I think you give the reader a lot of leeway, and you trust the reader a lot in this book, which is brave, considering the subject matter. But I did kind of feel along the way, and this is my own lens that I bring to this, obviously, because it's the racial justice dimension of it that really just stands out for me. And I wanted you to call this what it was, and I wanted you to say what a terrible racial hate crime this was. And of course, you've explained why you don't do this, and also you complicate the picture, because as you clearly show, also in the podcast, by the way, go and listen to the podcast. It's called Bloodlands. As you say, this is not just a story about an evil, terrible racial hate crime. And of course, that's right. The danger, however, is that in the complexity, we might lose some moral clarity. And so I think that there was a negotiation that I could see going on there in the work, where on the one hand, you didn't want to just tell a similar story that's always been told, but on the other hand, I wanted more about how evil and racist these people were.
It's a trial story in some ways. So it's inevitable that the white farmers, the 6 men on trial, and the trial process focuses on them. It's hard to get away from that. I spent many years making sure that the story of Simon and Samuel and their characters and their life was not ignored in the same way it was in court. And I did my utmost to try and explain that, and to stay with Ruth in particular and her story right the way through to the end, and not to end the book as I could have done on, well, what happened afterwards to the white farmers. To me, once the verdict came through, you revert back to the story of Ruth and her family. I take your point, but my view is, just again as a consumer, that if you can't get that anger and that, shocking nature of what happened as it suffuses the entire book, the return to the crime, and the way Simon and Samuel were treated in hospital, the way they were misdiagnosed, the way they were, just time after time let down. I don't feel the need to stand on a chair and restate what is already so blindingly obvious, and what you, as you say, you got from the book. So I'm very happy if people are left with that sense of rage, and of a rage not fully explored, because hopefully that means there's some sort of life beyond the book. You're not tying everything up in a bow and going, there you have it. But yeah, I can concede your point as well.
No, it's a read that makes you feel something, and I think that's one of the hardest things to do with literature, is to take the reader from the pages and into some feeling or other, and you certainly go through the range of emotions when reading it.
I also think it is important to understand the impact on that white farming community, what they were feeling, what impact it had on their children, the suicide attempt and so on. I mean, that's not to somehow let the farmers off. That's for the judge. It's not to apologize for, excuse their actions, but it is, I think, a much richer tale when the protagonists and the antagonists are rounded human beings.
Well, Andrew, I could keep you here all day, but we've already gone over our allotted time. Thank you very much for this important work. I hope that SMWX viewers will head out and buy it. We'll include links to where you can buy it below in the video description. And Andrew, look forward to future work. Anything that you're working on now that you'd like to talk about? Where to after this?
I'm desperate to write more, but I would be jumping the gun if I said I had something lined up. At the moment, I'm focused on my day job. So I was recently in Mozambique. I've got a lot of trips planned as things start to open up, or at least as interest renews away from COVID stories and to all the many other issues, shaping Africa at the moment. So yeah, a lot of travel planned.
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep a close eye on that. Also, make sure you check out the podcast associated with this book. And thanks for tuning into SMWX. Aye.